there, lovely people. Today we're going to be looking at how we write to persuade, and this is going to be a full-on crash course, okay? This is a whistle-stop tour. It is fast, and there is a lot of information here. I'm pretty much teaching you everything you'd need to be able to succeed in a sort of GCSE persuasive writing situation, which means there's a lot here, but I want to make sure that you have everything you need to succeed. So, if it is too fast, it's okay. It's a video. You can pause me, you can slow it down, you can come back and listen to the same thing over again. Absolutely no trouble. First of all, we need to think about why exactly it is that we are trying to write to persuade. So the purpose of writing to persuade. You probably, with your teacher, talked about purpose, audience, format and tone, or you might have talked about genre, audience, purpose and structure. So path or gaps or something like that. This is the purpose. This is the reason why we're writing. So basically, overall, the purpose of persuasive writing is to make whoever's reading your work agree with your point of view, or to make them do something. So you might have charity, might be using persuasive techniques in their writing because they're trying to convince you that their charity is important. They might be trying to raise awareness of an issue that they want you to believe is important, so they want you to agree with their viewpoint. Or they might be trying to motivate you to do something like give them money. Companies often use persuasive techniques because they want you to believe that their product is worth spending money on, and they want to persuade you to buy the product. They want to motivate you to buy the product. And politicians a lot of the time use persuasive language because they want you to think that they are great, and the reason they want you to think they're great is so that you will vote for them. Obviously, you're not 18, so they don't want you personally to vote for them, but they want everyone who listens to their message to vote for them. So when we're in lessons, we normally look at something like this for our work when we're writing, with our success criteria on it, so we can see all the things that we want to do. And if we kind of go through that success criteria now, I think it will make really obvious what we're actually aiming for here. The first thing it says here is that the introduction briefly covers the topic of the persuasive writing. It just means that somewhere near the top of your writing, I need to know what exactly it is that you're writing about and what I'm supposed to be being persuaded of. If you don't tell me what you're trying to persuade me about, I won't know what to feel, which defies the purpose of you trying to make me feel it. It says here written in the present tense. Actually, you can kind of switch about tenses, but usually we're thinking about a present problem. Putting your arguments in different paragraphs just means that your ideas are organised and it's clear for the reader so they can go back and they can think about it. And it works really well if those paragraphs have a topic sentence. So the first sentence of that paragraph tells me what the rest of the paragraph is going to be about. If you've used persuasive techniques to support your argument, then that means that you have used specific techniques like de Forest or a faster croc to support your ideas. Now, we're going to go through de Forest and a faster croc. That's the bulk of what this video is about because that's kind of the bulk of what writing to persuade as a different style to other ways of writing is about. So we'll go through those, but you need to use them lots and all the way through your work, especially because if you've been asked to write to persuade, what you're really being asked to do is show off that you understand how to use those in an effective way. Have you used your AP sentences and done it on purpose rather than just slotting in an AP sentence at random? Have you put them in there in a way where it highlights your argument? We'll go through the Allen Peake sentences as well. Have you kind of structured your ideas with some connectives to show how maybe one reason links onto another one, or how one thing must come before another thing? And then at the end, does your conclusion kind of summarise what you're trying to say? Does your conclusion maybe hammer in the last nail of the argument? What should I think when I come away from your text? That's ultimately what your writing to persuade should be aiming to do. So let's start with one of those persuasive techniques things. This is the first level, so we'll go through de Forest now. So our DeForest techniques are direct address, alliteration, facts, opinion, repetition, emotive language, statistics, and the rule of three, or sometimes we call that last one tripling. Now, really, in here, there should be another one, which is rhetorical question, and then I guess we should technically have two R's. So let's add that one there, rhetorical question. Now, let's go through them. So a direct address is the first one, and it just means when the writer is talking directly to the reader. The idea is that if I'm talking directly to you personally feel like you have to do whatever I'm saying, and you feel like it's a conversation between us. But actually, it's not. It's a conversation between whoever's writing the text and anyone who reads it. So you've got this, your country needs you. Well, that's to anyone who reads the poster, but it feels like it's to you personally. You can often see direct address through that second person pronoun. So the words like you, your, yours will bring that out, that direct address. The next one then is alliteration. So alliteration is when more than one word in a row starts with the same sound. So the example we've got here is tango will make your taste buds tingle. A couple of things that people often get wrong about alliteration that we need to fix here are, firstly, not all of the words have to start with the same letter. So lots of times people think that you can't put any other words in between, but that's not true. You can have just lots of words in the same sort of sentence, lots of words in consecutive sentences that start with the same sound, and that'll be fine. The other thing is that people tend to think that all of them have to start with the same letter, and that's not true either. The reason they tend to start with the same letter is because if they start with the same sound, that's the letter that makes that sound. But if you had 7 slimy snakes on the ceiling, well, ceiling begins with a C, but it still says, so actually that would also be alliteration. Starts with the same sound. This is useful because it's musical. It's actually a technique from poetry. So it makes it more memorable because it's a bit like a tune in your head. We've got fact and opinion, and I've put them together because facts and opinion are two opposites. Okay, they go together, but they're actually opposite things. So Coca-Cola is the most popular soft drink in the world is a fact. Facts are things that you could count or you could prove. Now I could count up every drink that is sold in the entire world and work out what type each drink is, and the one that sold the most would be the most popular. Or I could take a poll and all the people who voted for it would make Coca-Cola the most popular. So I could prove that. If you could prove it, it's probably a fact. Coca-Cola is the most delicious soft drink there is. Well, that's an opinion. There's no right answer. Someone else could disagree. I personally don't agree. I personally think that coffee is much more delicious than Coca-Cola, but you might think that banana milkshake is, or you might think that a nice cup of tea is better than Coca-Cola. And that's your own personal thoughts. So that makes that an opinion. But can you see how similar the opinion and the fact are? They're barely different. Literally, they are one word different. And yet one is a fact and one is an opinion. And what makes opinions really persuasive, and you see this a lot, is when someone states their opinion like it's a fact. Because then people feel more likely to believe it. So if you see something that's stated like this, like it's a fact, then you know they're trying to be persuasive. A good way to do it in your own writing. Don't put your opinion by starting I think. Think of the sentence you would have written. I think Miss Gowland is the best teacher there is. And then just get rid of the I think. Miss Gowland is the best teacher there is. Now, you know, it's absolutely not a fact, but it sounds much more like a fact because you got rid of the I think at the beginning of the sentence. Repetition is another really good way to persuade people. And basically the reason why is repetition is the best way to remember something. It's why we're always asking you to do revision over and over and over and over again. It's because if you repeat something, you're more likely to remember it. I know that's true because I bet you could pause this video right now and think of 5 slogans or jingles from adverts off the top of your head with no trouble. And the reason why is you've seen those adverts over and over and over and over again, because that's how they're trying to persuade you. The thing is, you can't persuade someone of something if they can't remember what it is. But the downside with repetition, so you can absolutely use it in your work and it works brilliantly, but don't use it too much. So I've got the example here of the Go Compare Man, because this is an example of how everyone just got sick of it, and it makes it feel boring and like writing out lines, because if you do something over and over and over again, it just gets annoying and it just gets boring. So I would say keep this limited in your work. Don't go crazy. Just use it a bit. If we look now at the rhetorical question, a rhetorical question is a question that you wouldn't expect an answer to. And basically, the reason is that the answer is obvious. You're implying the answer in the question. So, for example, here we've got, do I look like I was born yesterday? I mean, the joke is that he does in this picture, but obviously when someone normally says that, they don't actually want you to say that they look like they were born yesterday. They're implying that, of course, they weren't. Here we've got Garfield. What a boring life I have. How could anyone have a more boring life? He's not actually asking if anyone could have a more boring life. He's implying that it would be impossible for anybody to have a more boring life than he has. It's kind of like when an adult says to you, what made you think that was a good idea? What they're implying is it wasn't a good idea, but they're not really asking why you thought it was a good idea. So rhetorical questions are useful because they put the reader in a position where they either have to agree with what you've implied or make themselves look stupid. And people don't like to look stupid, so they tend to just agree with the question. Emotive language is used basically to pull on your emotions. So it pulls on your emotions or your heart. So you can see here you've got all types of emotive language, and that could either be words that are just actual emotion words, or they can be words that are specifically designed to get an emotional response. So like the word wasteful isn't an emotion in itself, but if I say someone was being wasteful, you're immediately disappointed or angry with that person. The word litterbugs here is specifically being used to make the people seem small, like bugs, and it makes them seem silly because it's a silly name. So using the emotive language, words that make an emotional reaction, can help to put across your idea. And this isn't just something that is done in school creative writing or in school persuasive writing. If you look at adverts on the television, if you look at the way that politicians speak, they often use this type of language. So you've often seen it, and when you start looking for it, you'll see it more and more. Statistics are a really good way to persuade somebody. Basically, they're like a special kind of fact, and they're normally stated as numbers or percentages. So you often see something like 80% of your energy cost, or 2 under 25s. The idea is that most people won't argue with statistics, because if I include statistics in my writing, it seems like I did research and I know what I'm talking about. So they're used to make your writing seem a bit more trustworthy. The thing about statistics is you can kind of represent the data to look however you like through the statistics. And the other thing about statistics is, if you're in a maths lesson or a science lesson, absolutely you should be making sure that your statistics are correct. But if you're doing persuasive writing for English, you really don't have to, especially in an exam or an assessment situation. No examiner in the world thinks that you know every statistic about whatever the topic of that exam is. They just want to know that you know that there should be statistics. So you can totally make those statistics up and no one will even be mad. The last one in DeForest then is the rule of 3. So we sometimes call this tripling. But basically, it's just either using 3 descriptive words or doing repetition as 3 times. So Disneyland is the most exciting, wonderful, unbelievable theme park. You got 1, 2, 3 descriptive words, adjectives there. Delicious pizza, delicious pasta, delicious everything. We've repeated the same one 3 times. You can even do this with the sentence. So you could have sentences, 3 sentences in a row that start the same way or that end the same way. But the 3 is what's important. Now, you might have heard someone say before that 3 is a magic number. It is. I don't know why, but it's a trick of the human brain that actually we just learn things better if they are presented to us in 3s. Our brains hang on to them better than if they were in 2s or 4s. And the thing is, what you want is for whoever's reading this, for their brain to hang on to whatever you've said, because you want them to remember it so that they'll be persuaded by it. So using tripling is a way to do it. Again, it's one that I would say don't use it in every single sentence all the way through your work because it'll be a bit too much. But maybe think about sprinkling it in a couple of times. Now that's your deforest, and that works brilliantly. And if you're happy just using deforest and you think, do you know what, this is enough of a challenge for me, that is fine. You can carry on to the end of the video where we've got some interesting ideas about how to structure this and how I'll repeat sentences. But if you're like, yeah, deforest, I already knew that, that's fine, I've got this. There's something else that we can do that's maybe a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more advanced, and that's faster croc. So, for faster croc, lots of these are actually the same. So we've got alliteration, hyperbole, facts, anecdote, statistics, the rule of 3, emotive language, repetition, contrasting pairs, rhetorical question, opinion, and creating an enemy. And you can see this croc was a bit faster than whoever was wearing these crocs. Now, it's slightly more advanced, but only slightly. It looks like a huge long list, but we've already done all of those ones when we did deforest. So those are gone, we don't need to worry about those. Instead, we'll just go through hyperbole, anecdote, contrasting pairs, and creating an enemy. And by going through those ones, we'll have filled in the gaps in our faster croc. It doesn't really matter which one you use. They're literally just mnemonics, so it's not important. No one's going to mark you on which one you've used. But it's just to help you remember a list of techniques so that when you're in an exam situation and you don't have any success criteria in front of you, or when you're in a work situation and you maybe don't have a chance to look these up, you can remember them and remember what it was that you were supposed to be doing. So if we have a look at hyperbole at first, hyperbole is just a fancy word for exaggeration. And yes, I know it looks like it says hyperbole. It's a Greek word and I'm sorry. Blame ancient Greek. So hyperbole is intentionally saying something, it's exaggerating something, intentionally saying something in a way that makes it sound much more extreme than it really is. But it is not intended to be taken literally. So if it's the lesson before lunch and I say, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse, I couldn't actually eat a horse. A horse is much bigger than me. I don't really fancy horse anyway. You know, more into like chips or chicken nuggets. But, you know, everyone knows this phrase, I could eat a horse. And everyone knows that what it means is I'm really, really hungry. Now, we use this all the time. If we say it's raining cats and dogs, there are not actually pets falling out of the sky. But by saying it much worse than it really is, it makes our writing seem a little bit more persuasive because it seems a little bit more over the top. You need to be careful with the hyperbole because if you just always go over the top, you seem a bit like you're just overreacting. But a little bit of hyperbole here and there. This is the worst tragedy that's ever befallen us, or this is the most important thing you can do to help other people. It might not be, but using superlative words, most, worst, best, greatest, smallest, fewest, those words can help you to pop a little bit of hyperbole in there without making your writing too over the top. Then next you have this anecdote. Now an anecdote is just a little story, and often it's a personal story. it's more memorable than just writing out facts because people's brains are hardwired to remember narrative. So your brain is designed to remember stories. It's actually a really useful thing because what it means is if you can turn your maths homework or your science facts, or if you can turn your geography work into a little story in your head, your brain is more likely to hang on to it. It's how our memories work. It's why when you think back about your life, you remember it a little bit like a little story of your life. Now, the thing about anecdotes is that they don't have to be true, and actually, when you see them in the wild, they're often not true, but they just have to sound true. And it's important that they do sound true because if you are writing a persuasive piece of work and you're writing about why we should donate to the Natural History Museum, and you start writing about how you had a pet dinosaur when you were a child and he was the best pet you'd ever had, that's clearly false and I'm going to stop listening to you. But if you were writing about how we should support the Natural History Museum and you started writing about how when you were little your grandma always took you to the Natural History Museum and that sparked your love of science and that's how you got into university, I don't know that that's not true. If I don't know how old you are, I'm not going to question it. So it sounds like it could be true. That's what's important. Now, key also is that an anecdote is a little story. It should not go on too long. If your anecdote takes over more than about half a paragraph, you've gone on too long. You need to make it shorter. So we've got this quotation here to kind of hammer that home because this is used all the time. You'll see when you're reading a newspaper article about something that's affected lots of people. So it might be a scam that's gone around. There'll be 2 or 3 examples of real life people who've been involved in it or who've had money taken away from them. It's used to make it human. It's used to make you understand that there are individual people who have individual stories with it. So you've got this quotation, a compelling story, even if factually inaccurate, can be more emotionally compelling than a dry recitation of the truth. It's the idea that if it's emotionally compelling, if it draws your emotions in, it works in the same way as emotive language. It makes you want to agree with whoever's speaking. After that, we have contrasting pairs. And for this one, you can see I've picked this example of the tortoise and the hare. Because we can use contrasting pairs in a couple of different ways, but one way to do that is to talk about the difference between 2 things. And a contrasting pair highlights the difference between those 2 things to the point that those 2 things help to define each other. So the tortoise is slow because he's being compared to the hare and the hare is fast. If we were comparing the tortoise to the snail, then actually the tortoise would be comparatively faster. And the hare is so fast because he's being compared to a tortoise. If I was comparing the hare to a cheetah, the hare would be the one who's slow. But by comparing them to each other, we know instantly when we talk about the tortoise and the hare that the tortoise is slow and the hare is fast. Also, they can be used to create tension between 2 things. So I might set up a contrasting pair to show this idea that there's either one choice or another choice. You often see this, and I've put as the example here, you're either with us or against us. So it might be like you either are a Slytherin or you're a Gryffindor. You have this contrast between the 2 things, and you can either be one or the other, even if it's not true, because in that example there are 2 other houses you could have been. But setting up the pair makes it seem like there's only 2 choices. With the hare and the tortoise, they're contrasting the idea of slow and steady versus quick but not very steady, and putting a tension in between them eventually to show you that one is the right idea and one is not the right idea in the context of the story. Sometimes a contrasting pair is used to reframe an idea. So here you've got the idea that more people are killed each year by falling coconuts than shark attacks. Now, this is using a contrasting pair and turning it round on its head. It's quite a tricky one, but if you get away with it in your work, it works brilliantly. Because we'd normally say shark attacks are dangerous, and falling coconuts probably not that dangerous. It's just it's just fruit, it's fine. But by putting them together, we're saying thing that doesn't seem dangerous, thing that seems very dangerous. Then we're saying that actually the thing that doesn't seem dangerous is more dangerous. So this is a bit like our tortoise and the hare, because the tortoise wins. It's the idea that we'd have thought that the fast animal would win all the races, but actually the slow animal does. We'd have thought that the shark attacks, which clearly sound pretty scary, would kill all the people, but the coconuts actually turns out more of a killer. And it reframes the idea of shark attacks, because shark attacks seem very serious, falling coconuts seem very silly. But when we do this way, and we say that more people are killed by the coconuts, it makes the shark attacks seem sillier than the coconuts. So twisting your idea around that way is tricky, but if you can do it, it's really, really effective. Also, I have no idea if this fact is true. That doesn't necessarily matter in your persuasive writing. You're not necessarily being marked on how much you know about coconuts and sharks. You're being marked on whether you know how to use the technique. The last one that we hadn't covered before from the Faster Croc is creating an enemy. So, effectively, the idea behind this is that readers are more likely to agree with you if they think that you have a common enemy. You might have heard the phrase, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And by creating a common enemy, it makes everybody agree with the idea that that thing is wrong. So then we're all on the same side of the argument. And if we're on the same side, you might be more likely to agree with me about other things. You see this happen a lot. So a common enemy might be Hitler. Everybody kind of says, oh, he's very bad. Okay, now also let's talk about this other thing. We all agree that Hitler's bad, so we're all on the same side. It doesn't have to be a person, even, the common enemy. It could be an idea. So it doesn't have to be a living human being that's your enemy. You've got this image up here of a man in army clothing with the mask and the gloves, because you might have seen this more recently with the way that coronavirus has been portrayed. It's been made out to be a common enemy. The idea is that we're all trying to fight against it, we're all trying to stop it, but it's not really fighting, it's not really conscious, it's just a virus. It doesn't think about us. It doesn't think of us as its enemy. It doesn't really have enemies, because that's not really how a virus works. But we've had this imagery of a war, and if you look through the news, you will have seen this idea that coronavirus has been portrayed as a war, and lots of language used by people like the Prime Minister puts it in the position of a war. The idea is that we're all more likely to agree to do the things that we should if we have this common enemy and the virus is the enemy. But the common enemy can be anything. It could even just be an idea. I could say that homework is the common enemy, or I could say that laziness is the common enemy, or I could say that hay fever is the common enemy. So long as I set it up to sound like something that we're all going to fight against together, that's the common enemy. You need to be careful with this one. And this is actually where Hitler and the Scarecrow kind of join in with each other, because you need to avoid an obvious straw man argument. A straw man argument is actually a fallacy, is what it's kind of, that's the technical term, which means a way that people are wrong, a fallacy, a way that people fall into a problem or have a fault. And basically, the idea is that if I'm making a straw man argument, I intentionally misrepresent your argument, intentionally misunderstand it to say you're saying something different to what you're really saying, so that I can argue against your point. And when I said it links in Hitler, that's because if you've ever been on a comment section anywhere on the internet, you've actually probably seen this happen, which is where someone will compare something to a common enemy, and a very common one that they pick is Nazism, and they will say that somebody is being a Nazi for something. So if I went online and somebody had made a spelling mistake and I corrected their spelling mistake in the comments, they might say, oh, you're being such a Nazi about it. Everyone has a freedom to spell how they like. Well, all I was doing was correcting a spelling, but they're making out as though I'm putting in a whole ideology behind that, a whole set of ideas behind that. So you need to think about not setting up obvious straw mans, because it makes, and I know straw mans rather than straw men sounds wrong, but go with me. It makes your argument sound silly. It makes it sound like you don't understand if the straw man argument is too obvious. That doesn't mean that you can't do it, but you need to be subtle about it. So don't just in an essay say that somebody is being a Nazi because they set homework. That's not going to work. That's going to seem like an obvious overreaction. But maybe just hint that something is dangerous. Maybe just use language that's related to war or related to an enemy to draw in that idea. Now, technically, there is one last technique that we haven't talked about that you might want to use, but it is the most advanced technique. So if anything up until now has confused you, I would say maybe leave this one, because it's one that you have to use so carefully, or you can mess up your whole work. This one is humour. Humour can be very persuasive because making a joke can help you persuade your audience. If everybody's laughing together, and if they think that they can laugh with you, they might think that you're more human and therefore more relatable, someone who they understand. They feel like you might be like them. But you have to be so careful with humour, because if you use humour in the wrong place or the wrong time, it can make you seem like a joke. You might use it in a way which undercuts your own argument, or worse, you might use it in a situation where humour is not called for. If you use humour when you're writing a charity persuasive text about something awful, something very sad, like an illness, you're going to seem heartless and it's going to take out the punch from your ideas. But if you're using humour because you're writing about why school uniform should be banned, actually, that's fine. That's a perfectly sensible place where you might want to use it. So you need to think really carefully about whether or not humour is appropriate to the topic that you're writing, and whether or not that point in your essay is a good place for humour. So you're wondering probably, how am I going to start those sentences? And here are some sentence starters that can help you. So you might want to introduce your ideas. Now again, you don't necessarily need I think. You can totally get rid of I think, but it's one that you might want to use. Making your point has firstly, secondly, thirdly, furthermore, in addition, also, moreover, similarly, certainly, and words like surely, certainly, to show that something is obvious. It's totally true. Using these words to just introduce the sentence helps you get onto the right track. You might like to include some evidence or some details. Now, this is a little bit different to the evidence that you'd use if you were writing point, evidence, explain paragraphs about a book, because the evidence you use when you write point, evidence, explain articles is pretty much always a quotation. But the evidence you use in your persuasive writing is going to be maybe an anecdote, or maybe a statistic, maybe an expert opinion. So like an anecdote that's being told by a scientist or a doctor, somebody who knows a lot about the subject. Or it might also just be made up. And it's okay to make up your evidence in a persuasive writing exam, because what that does is gives you the opportunity to show off the technique, to show off that you know it, without having to show off what you know about whatever the topic is for the exam. It's okay. No one's marking you on how accurate the evidence is. We're marking you on how accurate it sounds. You've got some ending words to kind of pull things back. Undoubtedly is a great one because it shows that no one could possibly doubt what you've said. You might want to do something like without a doubt. It's the same idea. And it just kind of sums everything up. And you might want to use words like reasons, arguments, pros and cons to kind of pull in arguments that you could be talking about, pull in ideas. At this point, we might be thinking about, okay, great, you've given me so much information, but how do I put this together? What does a good one look like? Well, let's look at what a good one looks like, shall we? Here is a model text, and it's just showing some examples from a leaflet of persuading teenagers to eat a healthy diet. So it starts off by just stating that many people believe That's great. I don't know which people believe it. That's fine. Many people believe that a healthy body equals a healthy mind. Don't groan. So that's the joke there, but also that don't is an imperative. So it's a direct address to the person who's reading it. Don't groan. It is very true. The reality is that teenagers today have to face many challenges on a daily basis as a result of the academic pressure to succeed. Many teenagers today feel that they cannot find... Can you see how you've got that teenagers today, it's a little bit of repetition. It's not obvious. It's not over the top, but it's there. Feel they cannot find the time to dedicate themselves to a healthy eating plan because they are stressed about schoolwork, revision sessions, and part-time jobs. Schoolwork, revision sessions, part-time jobs. That's the rule of 3 coming through there. That's trickling. However, healthy eating does not need to be time-consuming or complicated. Read on to find out how. Can you see how there's a contrasting pair there? There's the idea that it is time-consuming and complicated. Here are time-consuming and complicated things. Schoolwork, revision sessions, part-time jobs. Here's something that's not complicated. Healthy eating. They're setting up a contrast between the two things. Here you can see it's even colour-coded. Finding the time to eat a healthy breakfast is important for both your physical and mental health. It's a topic sentence, which means it's showing me what the rest of the paragraph is going to be about. And we've used that direct address, your. Research has shown that eating a wonderful and wholesome breakfast will result in the following: improved concentration levels, providing the body with essential nutrients and lowering the chance of gaining weight. Okay, loads going on in here. Research has shown that. That's like an expert opinion. Wonderful and wholesome, that's emotive language. Doesn't have to be a wonderful and wholesome breakfast. Could be rubbish. I don't know what you had for breakfast, but using that as emotive language, it makes breakfast sound brilliant. Improved concentration levels, providing the body with essential nutrients, lowering the chance of gaining weight. That's rule of 3 again. Can you see how there are 3 examples? Plus, if you skip breakfast, you risk being unable to avoid the terrible temptation of eating an unhealthy snack during your mid-morning break. Okay, so 2 things there. First, terrible temptation is emotive language. Temptation is something that's bad. Terrible is something that's bad. Secondly, you've got alliteration there, just to really highlight that idea of terrible temptation. Of course, some teenagers might argue that they do not have time to make a healthy breakfast. They're pulling in the counter-argument there, the other side, and they're doing that because they're setting up an enemy, they're setting up a contrast. Some teenagers who think the wrong thing, and then here, the counter-argument, the right thing, and you've got the response to the counter-argument, what you could do instead. You've got these imperatives all the way through. They tell you what to do, so you feel more like you know what the person persuading you wants you to do. And also it's directly addressing them to you. It's giving you instructions. Can you see how twice they've got these short sentences for effect? But it's not all the way through. It's not all short sentences. You've got long ones in between. And then here you've got a rhetorical question to finish it off. All of these things add up to a really good piece of work. So we've seen what a good one looks like, and now we need to look at our Alan Pete sentences that we might want to include. This isn't all of the Alan Pete sentences, but these are some that might be useful specifically for your persuasive writing. So a simile, probably already know how to do a simile. It's just a sentence that compares one thing with something similar. And if you at this point are going, oh, I wonder if I could use this for my contrasting pairs, yeah, you probably could. Maybe do something with something that's completely opposite. But the idea is that it's like or as a. So you've got the examples, like a patient pale white face. It was as cold as a December evening. This one is doing the opposite. Can you see how August should be a hot month, but it's being compared with December, a very cold month. So it's using that contrasting pairs. 2 pairs of things that could go together. So they're 2 pairs of related adjectives. Each pair is followed by a comma and separated by the conjunction and. So an example, exhausted and worried, cold and hungry. They didn't know how much further they had to go. It's 2 little pairs put together just to show how much of something someone's feeling. Many questions kind of like an extension of your rhetorical questions. Where is the treasure? The diamonds, the gold, the rubies? It's showing that someone has lots and lots and lots of questions. If you use the adjective and then the same adjective again, repeated after the other one, it kind of shows that that word is more important. He was a fast runner, fast because he needed to be. It's showing that fast is the important thing here. 3 bad dash begins with 3 negative words, and they're normally adjectives, not always, but normally. In this last one, they're not. And they're followed by commas, but the third one's followed by a dash and then the question that relates to those adjectives. So the idea here is that the 3 that come before it almost set up a rhetorical question. Greed, jealousy, hatred, which of these are John Brown's worst traits? Incompetence, arrogance, stupidity, which of these was Custer's fatal flaw? So then you can almost use that to set up the structure of your next 3 paragraphs if you want. If you were writing about why school uniforms are bad, you could say something like expensive, uncomfortable, unfashionable. Which of these is the worst thing about school uniforms? And then your first one could be how expensive it is, your second paragraph could be how uncomfortable it is, and your third paragraph could be how unfashionable it is, and it almost sets you up for writing what you're going to write next. All the W's here, they're short sentences that begin with who, what, when, etc. And putting a lot of them together can kind of help you to set up those rhetorical questions, set up that idea. Why do you think he ran away? What next? Will that really be the end? Sets it up. Some others, the more, and imagine 3 are 3 of my personal favourites for your persuasive writing. And the reason why is that each one does something extra for you. So I'm actually going to start with the imagine 3. I love imagine 3 as something that you can use if you have absolutely no idea how to start a piece of persuasive writing. If you start with imagine 3 and then carry on with your persuasive writing, you will actually pretty much set yourself up to write a really good piece of persuasive writing. So the sentence begins with the word imagine and describes 3 adjectives or something. Imagine a time when people were not afraid, when life was very much simpler, when everyone helped each other. This is the story of that time. Imagine a planet where the sun always shines, where wars never happen, where no one ever dies. In the Andromeda 5 system, there is such a planet. It pulls the reader in and it has them imagining what you want them to. It's such a strong emotive technique in the beginning, and it's a lovely introduction. So if you've got no other ideas to introduce something, imagine 3 is a great way to do it. The more is fantastic because it means that you're definitely going to put that comma in the right place. And also, the more sentence implies cause and effect. So those things are going to be related. And what that means is that you're going to be writing something that will persuade someone. The more angry he became, the more he hammered his fist on the table. Well, that's an example from a story, but you can easily see how something like the more we litter, the more we damage our oceans could be a sentence that you would see in a persuasive writing text about littering. It works really well in that situation because it shows that your actions, the more you do them, have consequences the more that those actions have happened. And then this one, there's some others. I love this one because it means that you will definitely use that semicolon in the correct place. And a semicolon is a tricky thing. And if you can do it properly, you're showing off to whoever's marking your work that you understand how to do a tricky thing. Some people love football, others just can't stand it. If you were introducing a balanced argument, that would be such a good way to introduce it. Some people love Coca-Cola, others can't stand it. Some people think school uniforms are fantastic, others know the truth. Can you see how in that last one, I'm introducing my opinion straight away? So I'm unbalancing the argument straight away, but I'm using that to help me. Now, by this point, you've got loads that you can be doing to write a really good piece of persuasive work. But if you're still not sure, you might need a little bit more help or a little bit more structure. This last one is for you, okay? So if you feel like you need a little bit more help, maybe you need a little bit more structure. You don't know how to write your paragraphs. You have ideas, but you don't know how to put them together. This one's for you. It's the Oreo persuasive paragraph structure. You don't have to use this. And in fact, if you can do it differently, do. So if you are fine to write as you are, go right ahead. But this is really useful if you have no idea how to start, you're just completely stuck, or if you get halfway through your work and then you get all in a muddle. And it happens to all of us sometimes. So start off with your opinion. How do you feel about the topic? If I'm saying Oreos are the best cookie, okay. I think Oreos are the best cookie. My first sentence. Done. Done my first opinion. Tick. One reason I think this is that they have 2 layers of biscuit and a layer of cream. That's my reason, is the 2 layers of biscuits and a layer of cream. An example. This sets them apart from almost every other biscuit. The only other examples of biscuits like this are the custard cream and the bourbon, which are both fantastic biscuits in themselves. So I've used some examples. If I can use more examples, awesome. If I could use something else, maybe scientists have studied and found that 2-layer biscuits are superior to all other biscuits on almost every scale known to man. For this reason, I think that Oreos are the best biscuit. It's not the, most complicated way of structuring a paragraph in the world, but it gets my point across, it gets me somewhere, and it allows me to show that I understand how I should be writing. I hope that this video has helped you today. Please try to use these techniques in your writing. Please think carefully before you start writing. I'm so excited to see the persuasive writing that you come up with now. Good luck!